We are delighted to welcome Judy Nunn here this evening, a true icon of Australian literature. Judy has captivated readers for over 30 years, with more than 20 published books and over 1 million copies sold in Australia alone. Her stories, rich with authenticity and unforgettable characters, celebrate our country and its people, leaving a lasting impression long after the final page is turned. From stage to the screen and the page, Judy has always been a storyteller at heart. Please join me in welcoming Judy Nunn.
Thank you, David. How gorgeous. Well, here I am, and here you are, Geelong. Hello, gang. Thanks for coming out, and lovely to see so many gorgeous faces. Good to be here. Now, as David rightly said, I am here to talk about my book, Pilbara, which, hardly surprisingly, is set in a place called the Pilbara. Okay, you probably know where that is. It's in Western Australia, to the north, just beneath where the Kimberley is. Now, the Pilbara is a very, very old region. As a matter of fact, it's one of the, if not the, oldest areas in the whole of the world, on Earth, because it is, so to speak, geologically the first solid land to rise out of the primordial sea, which I think is pretty dramatic. And and given that sort of formation, those rocks that literally did rise out as a landmass, as you can imagine, there's a lot of energy within those rocks and a great deal of mineral deposit, very much lately, of course, as one would know, in the form of iron ore. So the iron ore these days, of course, in the Pilbara, iron ore is a massive industry. I mean, the mining there is one of the principal mining areas, of course, in the whole of Australia. I mean, if you think Gina Reinhardt and Hancock Mining, Rio Tinto, all that. But my book is not set in these days. My book is set in the early colonial settlement of that Pilbara area. Now, this was relatively late when you compare it to the other major areas of colonial settlement in Australia. The Pilbara wasn't actually settled until around the 1860s. And that's when the arrival of early settlers took place, because the land on offer there was relatively cheap. So people could front up, and instead of having to pay all the X amount of money required for those rich grazing areas, it's not prime grazing area, actually. It's not, your Gippsland and your beautiful green pasture lands. But, sure, cattle and sheep could survive there. And so that's what the early settlers were coming out for in the 1860s. Now, because there was no real lawmakers there. I mean, when you think of all the other colonial capitals of each of the colonial states, starting out with, of course, Hobart in Tasmania, then Sydney, then on to Melbourne, and Perth was settled in 1827, which is still a fair way earlier than the Pilbara. And because of that, there was no real adhesion to British law, which is one of the things that fascinates me so much about this area. In fact, the whole thing was gung-ho, if the truth be known. I have my own little personal ideas about this. I reckon the Pilbara was such a foreign terrain with very little on offer compared to many other places in the country that the colonial powers down south, which is a pretty rich area around Perth as far as grazing property and everything like that goes, they probably just thought, whoa, okay. I mean, who the heck would want to go and live in that godforsaken place? You could just make up your own rules. So with all of these adventurers who gravitated to this area of the state, there were only too many, all too willing to take on this job. In other words, to get a hold on the power. And one of these gentlemen I don't think he probably would have been a gentleman, but anyway, he was a bloke, called Robert John Scholl, S-H-O-L-L. This is a real chap, not one of my fictional people, and he really did exist. Now, I've got to check what he called himself, because I have to check a few notes here, because he was everything. He was appointed, government appointment, mind you, resident administrator and magistrate of the area. I don't know how he actually got that job. Well, I mean, I do actually, because if the truth be known, he was a bullshit artist. Now, he described himself as an entrepreneur, which, I mean, that covers a heck of a long, big field. And this is what his actual qualifications were. He said, a description of his career, this is, he'd been an explorer, a journalist, a harbour master, a customs official, a postmaster, and a lay reader of the Anglican Church. I don't know how he copped that one. But anyway, obviously he was a man of many talents. But where the heck was his law degree? I mean, what qualification did he have to rule the whole area? As I said, he was just very good at bullshitting. So the powers down south said, oh yes, you're a very impressive fellow. Off you go, you could be magistrate and all of this, which is what he did. Now, Scholl himself doesn't really feature as a character within the book, but he does feature hugely on the influence he has on my characters, this chap. Because, I'll just read you the tiniest little description. We get to know Scholl by the letters written by a bloke called Richard Burton. Now, Richard Burton, he's a film star and an explorer. Yeah, the famous explorer before Richard. But no, Geoffrey Burton. Geoffrey, well, they're very common names then, you know. They're all Geoffreys and Williams and Richards. So anyway, this bloke's Geoffrey Burton. And he is a member of the British landed gentry. As a matter of fact, his older brother William is, I told you, William, half of them were Williams. And William actually is Squire of Pendleton Estate, his family estate, for many generations in his family, in Yorkshire, not far from Leeds. Now, Geoffrey, the younger brother, is a real adventurer, and this landed gentleman, Geoffrey, arrives in the Pilbara to start up a sheep and cattle station and spread the name of the Burtons in the Pilbara and hopefully make a mint. So anyway, he describes Robert. He says he's a very colourful character, to put it mildly. And now, in the meantime, Robert Scholl has actually created positions for these people that he calls wardens. He also had created constables. No right to, he's got no, yeah. But anyway, the wardens, they were part-time wardens, and most of them, they had no qualifications. They were farmers, or they were in the pearly industry, which was big in the area at that time, and he would send them off to do various duties around his jurisdictional area, you know, go and arrest that mob, go and do this and that. So it was all, as I say, gung-ho. And anyway, Geoffrey writes back to his older brother, Richard, and he says he's been appointed this warden by Scholl. And he says anyway, Robert has decided that as I happen, this is in a letter to his brother, as I happen to be a warden who actually does have a legal qualification, given my law degree from Oxford, I would make an ideal replacement for him while he attends to long overdue personal matters in Perth. Hence, for the next 3 months, I shall be acting government resident and magistrate. Oh, and William, I simply must tell you, Robert's laissez-faire attitude was never more evident than when I told him I'd never once practiced law. All the Burton men go to Oxford, I said. Oxford degrees are de rigueur, but we never end up practicing whatever profession it is that we study. We just go home to the family estate and become gentlemen farmers. Well, he roared with laughter when I said that. It mattered to him not one whit. Who cares, he replied. You're well read. Make it up as you go along. I always have. And that is exactly what these guys did. Seriously, they were absolutely outrageous. And this is what, of course, attracts me to this amazing area and the way they're all so gung-ho. Now, 20 years later, Geoffrey's nephew, Charles, arrives in the Pilbara. Charles actually arrives in 1888. And Charles is a young widower with 3 young children. And he's come out to take over to help and work on his uncle's sheep and cattle station. And he finds himself shoved in a similar predicament to his uncle Geoffrey. And in actual fact, it's Geoffrey who's put him there, because Geoffrey has been paving the way for his young nephew. So he roams around the Pilbara telling everybody, presumably, Charles and everybody, my young nephew is completely, is as well versed in law as I myself am, and he'll be a wonderful asset to the area. Well, actually, Charles has never even been to university. He's been homeschooled by his father, and tutors in the rather wealthy estate of Pendleton. So when he finally finds that his supposed expertise in law is going to be taken advantage of, he has to well and truly fudge it, which is what he does. So I'm going to read you a little section here that will give you an example of this. Charles, fortunately, he has a bit of an ally in a rather mute character that I like called James Arthur Fry. And he's a police sergeant. Sergeant James Arthur Fry is the senior police officer, genuine chap, in the whole of this area. And in this scene, Charles and his station manager, interesting chap called Joe Lawson, they're with Sergeant Fry in the police quarters at Roban. And Charles has just been informed by the sergeant that as the appointed justice of the peace, he's being called upon to perform magisterial duties. Charles is not really looking forward to this. Okay. Yes, of course, Sergeant. Charles glanced at Joe, who shook his head as if to say, "Can't help you here, old chap. You have the offenders in custody, I take it?" "I do indeed, sir. They're all under supervision in Roban jail, but several are quite youthful and need to appear in court as soon as possible so they can get on with their lives." He coughed uncomfortably, hoping he hadn't sounded presumptuous. "That is, if you haven't sentenced them back to jail." "What are their charges?" "Thievery and assault, sir. Apart from one that is a 15-year-old lad." "What's his charge?" "Murder." "Good God," Charles exclaimed, taken aback. 15 years old? Who did he murder?" "His father." Charles and Joe sat in silence as the sergeant went on to explain. "Clifton Stroud, the deceased person, is, or more correctly was," Fry said, "a damnable drunk. In fact, I'd say he was the second worst drunk in the whole of the Pilbara." "The second worst?" It was Joe who asked the obvious question. Who was the worst? "Alwyn Stroud, the boy in custody." "Good God," Charles exclaimed once again. "Old Cliffy was a wild Welshman, and he began feeding the boy alcohol from when he was a little tyke," Fry continued, "around 2 years old. And nowadays the boy's constantly drunk. The two of them would drink together day and night, and inevitably they'd argue. And it'd always end with old Cliffy begging young Alwyn to shoot him because he didn't want to live on anymore. 'Shoot me, boyo, shoot me,' he'd yell. Oh, I've locked them both up time and again for disturbing the peace. On and on they'd go. Their behaviour's been the talk of the town for I don't know how long. When is old Alwyn going to shoot old Cliffy, people have been asking." "What prompted him to do it finally?" Sergeant Fry shrugged. "Oh, I've asked the boy that question any number of times, but he can't answer. He's got no memory of the incident, you see. He's a mess and he cries constantly over his father's death. Olwen's had no mother and no siblings for the whole of his life. His mum was Aboriginal and she died giving birth. He's never known family in any form, hasn't even resided in a proper house, living with his father mostly in the wild. Oh, I've no doubt the boy loved his dad, but something in his head finally snapped and he did as his father told him to. Shot him in the head at point blank range. At 10 o'clock the following morning, Charles took his seat in the magistrate's chair on the bench in the Roban courthouse. Seated at the table below the bench was the police sergeant, and in the first row was Joe Lawson and a man with a mop and bucket who'd been cleaning the place until told by Fry to sit down. At the back of the court sat a number of wardens from Roban Jail with their prisoners, each prisoner individually shackled. Police Sergeant Fry stood. "All rise," he bellowed. The motley row of wardens and offenders rose to their feet, chains clinking. "I declare this court is now in session. The Honourable Charles Burton, JP, presiding," Fry intoned, then looked to Charles. "Are we ready to proceed, Your Worship?" "We are, Sergeant Fry." Further clinking as the motley crew sat. "Proceed with your first case, Sergeant." "Yes, Your Worship. The court calls Francis Morley." Fry turned towards a scrawny young man of Aboriginal appearance, not yet an adult, more a youth, really, indicating he should stand in front of Charles's bench. "Your Worship, this young man is charged with stealing 3 cats from the Jubilee Hotel. Cats which the publican owned as pets. The animals have not been located." "How do you plead?" "Guilty," the young man replied. "What did you do with the cats?" Charles asked. "I ate them." "Why did you do that?" "I was hungry." Charles closed his eyes briefly. Is this really happening, he wondered. English law in the Pilbara was nothing short of bewildering. Then, pointing a judicial finger at Francis Morley, he announced, "It is the decision of this court that you proceed immediately to the Jubilee Hotel and apologise to the publican for stealing his cats. You are to remain at the hotel for 3 hours and assist the yardman with any work he requests you do, then you can go home." Several similar cases followed. Charles, realising that the sergeant was genuinely concerned for the welfare of these young men, or boys, more accurately, and mostly of mixed race, whom he'd been forced to place in custody in the ghastly confines of Roban Jail. It was here, in this terrible place, infamous throughout the entire region, that hundreds of men lived in appalling conditions and brutality was rife. Charles accepted pleas of guilty from the boys and, on the advice Sergeant Fry had offered the previous day, fined them each £1 to be paid over 2 years. "You are now free to leave the court," he announced. After the boys had been unshackled and ushered away, Fry presented the final case. "And now, if it please the court," he gestured to the rear, and the remaining warder pushed forward a frail, mixed-race Aboriginal boy of 15. Little more than a child, he stood before the bench, gazing up at Charles, trembling and red-eyed, a forlorn mess. "Olwen Stroud," Fry intoned, "you are charged that on the Saturday, the 15th of this month, at the rear of the Victoria Hotel in the town of Roban, you did unlawfully kill and murder one Clifton Stroud by shooting him in the head. How do you plead?" Still looking up at Charles, the boy said, "Guilty, sir." Sergeant Fry Charles announced. I am fully aware of the facts in this case and the circumstances surrounding them. Yes, Your Worship. I am bound by law to sentence Alwyn Stroud to death or imprisonment for this capital crime. I have decided upon this and believe a term of imprisonment will be appropriate. Therefore, Alwyn Stroud, I hereby sentence you to a term of imprisonment not exceeding the rising of this court. He stood. And now, as there is no further business outstanding, I declare this court closed. All rise, Fry bellowed. It wasn't until the afternoon, when he and Joe were in the dray making their way back to Burton Station, that Charles finally commented on the day's proceedings. I simply cannot comprehend what occurred in Roban Courthouse this morning, he said. Are we not in a colony of Queen Victoria's British Empire? Are we not subject to the rules of its law? How could that charade possibly have happened? I thought it went rather well. Joe Lawson smiled contentedly. It was a Molière farce, Charles exclaimed. An English court of law was appallingly disrespected. It simply won't do. Oh, come along, Charles. Do stop being so stuffy. Everything worked out perfectly. In fact, as you landed gentry might say, spiffingly. Oh, do stop that, Charles snapped. Stop what? Making fun of me. I'm not, old man, Joe protested. I'm deadly serious. And he was. Today, justice was served to the highest degree, he went on. Everyone received precisely what they deserved. Fry can close the cases he's had in abeyance, and you have done your duty to the Crown. The whole charade, as you call it, was a display of sheer genius. Annoying as Joe could be, this time Charles knew he was right. Both men fell silent as the horses, sensing their home nearing, quickened their pace. In the back of the dray, scrawny legs dangling over the rear, Alwyn Stroud gazed about at the quiet surrounds and wondered what was to become of him. Well, now that's not only an example of the gung-ho attitude to law and what they could get away with, but the fact that it's a bit of an insight into Charles, that there is a good bloke. He saved Alwyn Stroud's life. Most definitely, that briefly mentioned terrible Roban jail was the most appalling example of the worst sort of treatment of the local Indigenous people, as all Indigenous people have been treated by all colonial takeovers, not just the British, of course, but the French, the Dutch, the Spanish, you name it, any empire claiming lands elsewhere are going to either annihilate or mistreat, shockingly, the local peoples. But in the Pilbara, they really were. Roban Jail was a shocking place. The men there, and many of them boys, they were coffled. They wore coffles, iron chains around their necks, around their ankles, and chained together like animals in coffles, and worked as slave labour, building the town and the roads. So obviously Charles took the law into his own hands, as everybody did. But in this situation, to the advantage of all concerned. Now, my fictitious Burton Station is 10 miles east of that big township of Roban, the major town in the Pilbara, and 7 miles south of that is a smaller town called Cossack. And Cossack was the port of the Pilbara region in those days. Cossack, I think I can safely say, very colourful place, of course, being a port city, particularly, not a city, port town, heavens above, no cities then. But I can safely say that Cossack was, in many regards, the principal inspiration for my writing this book, which is a bit weird, really, because I think most people, considering the fact that I do write historically based fiction, I think it's sort of assumed that I wander around Australia thinking, wow, that's an interesting area, or that's a really beaut town with a great history. I think I'll just plonk my characters there and take it from there, you know. But I don't actually do that. This is my 19th book, and I think if I simply did that, it might be a little bit sort of, I don't know, repetitious. It would be colourless for me. It would become a bit formulaic. So what I need a peg to hang the hat on, as it were, something that will really, sparkle and inspire me. Now, it could be the littlest thing. I mean, this is the question that's asked more than any other of any fiction, writer of fiction, of course. Where do you get your ideas? Where do you get your inspiration? And it could be a tiny little thing that just snowballs and becomes bigger than you ever thought would happen and takes over the whole book. Or it could be a giant canvas that you think, this is such an important part in our history, I've got to write about it. I'll give you an example of both. My most recent book, Black Sheep, for instance, was set very much in sheep country around Goulburn. That's why they've got the big merino there, for goodness sake. Around Goulburn in New South Wales. And it is the breeding of merino wool. But actually, it's not really about the breeding of merino wool or sheep, pasturing and all of this sort of stuff. It's really about the people who are breeding the sheep and creating the wool. Because I was inspired here, would you believe, by a nursery rhyme, the fairly obvious one, Bar, bar, black sheep. Have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane. Now, who are these 3 people, and what do they represent? As all old English nursery rhymes, there is a very definite meaning to this. And it was during the 1600s when the king needed to feed up his coffers to fund his religious wars. So he raised the taxes on wool. And these bales of wool represent the taxes. So first bale of wool for the master is the king. And that is all the stuff that's to go into his coffers, the money from the tax, to fund the wars. The next, the dame, bale of wool to the dame. The dame is the church. You always had to look after the church. And let's face it, they were religious wars. And the third one is what the poor little farmer is left over with. That's all he gets, the third bale. So the taxes, yeah. On we go. Well, now that's pretty self-sufficient. It's self-explanatory. It's just sufficient enough to know what the nursery rhyme means. But why black sheep? That fascinated me. Bye-bye, black sheep. So I did a fair bit more, searching around and researching, and found, well, it's fairly obvious. One would realise that black wool, you can't dye. So that could make, if everybody's having funerals and black fabric is frightfully in, the black sheep's going to be pretty valuable with the wool. But white wool, of course, you can dye any colour. So surely white's going to be more expensive. And then I discovered further that the ingredients that go into making black dye in those days were very expensive. So, again, the market, if it's the black wool they want, that's going to be the most valuable. So if you translate this into human beings, is the black sheep of the family the most valuable, manipulative, he could control the market, or is he the least valuable? Is he going to bring the family down? And that's the way the littlest thing that's interested you can suddenly take over a whole book and become a whole book. That's what happened with that one. The idea in a big canvas is the obvious one for me is the book before that, a little earlier, called Khaki Town, which landed in my lap as a secret I discovered via a friend of mine, a wartime secret that actually involved in 1942 in Townsville with the imminent invasion of the Japanese army. Battle of the Coral Sea, all of that. And we came so close. We were really going to be invaded if it had not been for the American soldiers And both American black and white soldiers were brought out. The Americans, again, like the Pilbara Indigenous people, treated like slave labour by their own government, their own military, and these young men had signed up to fight a war. They weren't even given weapons. They were just, given picks and shovels and sent out into the back and beyond to build the airstrips and the infrastructure required. Pretty terrible. Well, the 96th Battalion, Labour Battalion, actually rebelled against this, quite rightly so, shocking treatment. They rebelled against their white commanding officers, and there was a mutiny. Now that was kept so secret, as you can imagine. This is American soldiers, black and white. Lives were lost, mutinying here on Allied soil. So the Australians and Americans, both military and government, kept it secret. And a bloke was sent out, actually, he was sent out and by Roosevelt, and that young bloke's name was Lyndon Baines Johnson. And he was sent out as a young congressman to discover what happened with this terrible mutiny, and above all, to keep it absolutely zilch. So upon discovering something like that, you'd be mad not to write a book about it, wouldn't you? So that is what you would call a big canvas. It's still kept a mad secret. You can look it up. 96th, in brackets, coloured, close brackets, Labour Battalion, Americans in 1942. A big shocker. But anyway, still very little about it. Now, these are inspirations, but as I said, surprisingly enough with this book, I was inspired by a place, and that place was called Cossack. Well, the Pilbara, most certainly, but the town of Cossack. Now, this is the second book, actually, based around the Pilbara that I've written. The first one came out in 2007, and I was researching it, going to the Pilbara to research, of course. I always go where I'm going to base a book to research. And there I was in the Pilbara in 2006 with my husband, Bruce Venables, who's an actor, writer like me, and except that he's lazy and I'm not, but more about him in a minute. He's the only person, I've said to Karen many a time, the only person I know who can make himself the centre of attention in absentia. And somehow he does. Whenever I talk, Brucey's there. But anyway, there you go. And I also had my big brother Rob with me. And I had Rob with me for a specific reason, because this book that I was setting in the Pilbara, writing in 2006, was actually set in the period, it was set in the 1970s. And it was about iron ore mining. And it was very much environmentally based. So Rob was with me because he was an environmentalist, and he had been there in the Pilbara, employed by Woodside Mining in the early 1970s for that very reason. And he'd lived there for a number of years with his wife and his little kids. And he said, "Oh, you've got to come and see Cossack. I'm in the history of it. It's fascinating. You'll love it." Sure, we went to Cossack, the original port of Pilbara, when it was first settled. There was nothing there. Oh, what's so fascinating? It was riveting because it's ghost town. And the original, rather once grand courthouse, the remnants of it remained, and all the rest was just rubble. There was a little graveyard for Japanese, a little graveyard for Europeans, and the history of it was extraordinary. Rob said, the big craze, when I was here in the 1970s, everybody would take their kids and they'd go fossicking in Cossack, which I think sounds stunning. Let's take the kids and go fossicking in Cossack. So he said, what you'd unearth? You'd unearth all these lives. You kids would haul out other kids' toys from all those years ago, or opium pipes, or, utensils, and and we studied up on we didn't study up but we were both, Bruce and I, as writers, fascinated. Bruce said, geez, this would be a great place to set a book back then, Jude. And I said, I'm writing a book based in the 1970s. You're a writer, you go off and write it. And of course he never did, because as I said, he's a lazy sod. But nevertheless, that the idea of Cossack in those early days of development just hung around in the periphery of my brain. And so about a couple of years ago, I think, I had this great character-driven idea that I wanted to develop. And I knew that I wanted to base this story in the toughest, most lawless, most brutal part of the country. I immediately, of course, thought of the Pilbara. And I thought of Cossack. So last year I went back again with Brucey, not with Rob, because Rob in the interim, sadly, Big Brother Rob has died. But I curse that because he was the best research person I've ever had. But there you go, you know. So anyway, there we are. We go back again. And would you believe Cossack has been reborn? I mean, it's bizarre. But the local Naluma people, it's been rebuilt, not the whole township, of course, which was thriving, but the bones of it. There's the old courthouse has been completely regenerated in its full glory. And there's the old bond store, there's the jail, bits of streets going through, the old stone jetty is there, and the wharf rather. And it's bizarre. I could wander around thinking, well, this is where my character's going to go, and it's not just a cardboard cutout, pioneer settlement town. It's built of the old bluestone rock and in the solid, structures architecturally that it would have been. Fascinating. So I thought, they did that just for me. How nice of them. I've got a feeling they didn't, but God, I loved it. Now, could you? And isn't that strange? Only 60 years that township lasted. And yet within that area, those people pulling in at that old stone wharf, there was gold discovered at a place called Malina, just north of Roban. The pearling industry was huge there. Actually, Cossack was the pearling capital of Australia until about the 1880s, it started, and through the 90s started moving up to Broome. And of course there were all those early settlers that I mentioned. And then 60 years later, it's a ghost town. Now, could you bear one more little read I'll do to give you a feeling of Cossack? I've got enough nods there that I'll go for it. If you were just going, must we? I promise I wouldn't. Okay, now this is a scene, we've moved on a bit. Charles has 3 children. The oldest one is a daughter. Her name is Victoria. At this stage, she's 16, and she's a very intelligent young girl. She's actually teaching English 1 day a week at Cossack. Safely in the afternoon. She's not allowed to go out at night or anything. She comes in from the property to teach English, but she is in actual fact a very willful girl, and she is determined to disobey all the warnings and go out to into Cossack at night. So, she changed from her school teacher navy blue into her riding trousers and rough shirt. Best not to advertise her gender, she decided. At a passing glance, people would presume she was a man. And just to be safe, she took her cloth shoulder bag with the Enfield revolver, its weight resting reassuringly by her side. Then, while the lodgers were dining, she crept downstairs. A quick look up and down Perseverance Street assured her the town was relatively quiet, as she had presumed it would be, and intending to avoid the central area with its lights and its pubs, she turned right and set off on her way out of Cossack. She passed the Malay camp on her left, and then beyond that the Chinatown tents to her right, knowing that just 100 yards further would see her free altogether from the township and alone on the sandy soil of the foreshore. Once there, she made her way down to the old wharf, where it stood on the river's edge, a marine light marking its presence. People rarely came near the place at night. Seating herself on a mooring bollard at the wharf's edge, she marvelled at the stillness of the night. The gentlest breeze came off the water, relieving the stifling heat of the evening. Good God, even now in the middle of the dry season, which would be winter to those down south, it was hot up here in the Pilbara. But so very beautiful, she thought, looking out over the tangled growth of mangroves silhouetted in the moonlight and listening to the gentle lap of the water. Then suddenly, and with a sense of shock, she realised she was not alone. She'd heard something. What was it? A cough. A man's cough. And then something else. Another man. Another man laughed. The sounds were coming from behind the storage shed, not 20 yards away. Victoria stood, instinctively reaching into her cloth bag, her hand wrapping itself around the handle of the Enfield revolver. She would quietly steal away, she decided. To stay might well be to court trouble. She turned to go, but then heard a voice, a child's voice, raised in protest, a cry, perhaps of pain. "Who's there?" she called. Scuffling noises and mutters reached her through the darkness. Then the outline of a man appeared from behind the shed. Well, what do you think you're doing here, lad?" "No business of yours, sir," she answered, feeling her pulse quicken. What were these men up to? Her voice was the giveaway. "Ah, not a lad, I see." The man came nearer, squinting for a closer view of her, and where she stood in both the marine light and the moonlight, he could see her clear as day. My, what do we have here?" he slurred lasciviously. "What a looker you are, missy." He was well drunk, she could tell. As he spoke, a young Aboriginal girl, no more than 9 or 10 years old, darted out from behind the shed. She ran straight past the man and then straight past Victoria and threw herself off the wharf into the river. Victoria gazed after her, alarmed. The child had disappeared altogether. She could see nothing but the moon's reflection, rippling on the now ruffled water's surface. What had happened to the girl? What was she to do? "Don't worry about her, darling," the man said dismissively. "She's a black. They can swim like fish. She's headed for her mob's camp on the other side of the river. It's low tide once more. She'll swim it easy." But she was only a child, Victoria muttered in outraged disbelief. "How could you—" "She's a black," the man snapped. "A heathen. She was getting no more than she deserved. Or she was about to. That is—" Victoria noticed his gaze shift to over her shoulder. "That is, until you interfered." "I take it your friend has now circled behind me and is approaching my back," she said. "Whatever gave you that idea, darling?" His grin was malevolent. "But it happens to be right. Oh, my lovely, you are now in a lot of trouble." He was all but licking his lips in anticipation. "I'm afraid I must contradict you." Victoria drew the Enfield from her shoulder bag. Not for 1 second had her hand relinquished its grip. She raised the revolver and aimed the barrel directly at the man's head. "It is you who is in trouble. You and your friend." She tilted her head as if listening intently. "Your friend, who I sense has lost his nerve and is thinking of running away," she added. She smiled as she heard the man run off. "Oh dear, now you're alone. How sad." "You slut." Sweat instantly beading, the man tried to bluff his way through the abject fear that now fell upon him. "You filthy slut, who do you think—" "Turn your back and get down on your knees." Victoria's voice was as cold as ice. The man did so, terrified, realising just how much trouble he was in. This girl was going to kill him. He'd seen the murderous look in her eyes. He wanted to run. He wanted desperately to run away like his brother Arnie, but his body was frozen to the earth as he knelt motionless, waiting for the inevitable bullet. Victoria marched up behind him and swung her arm with all the strength she could muster, sending the magazine of the heavy revolver crashing into the side of his skull. Then she stood back and watched his unconscious form drop to the ground, where it began bleeding into the dirt. She returned the Enfield to her shoulder bag, knelt and felt the man's pulse. He was alive. And there didn't appear to be copious amounts of blood, although it was difficult to tell in the dark. She would leave him here to be discovered in the morning, either dead or alive. He might bleed out through the night, but she didn't particularly care. Men like him didn't deserve to live anyway. What sort of vile people are you, she thought as she took her leave. This place attracts the very dregs of humanity. So a touch of the toughness of Cossack, etc. But let's face it, Victoria is not quite a normal girl. She's actually part of a modern element, I see, to this book, despite the fact that it is set in the 1800s. And it comes in the form of characters. Victoria is certainly Victoria is a very, very strong young woman. And she's a bit of a psychopath perhaps, but no, I don't think so. She knows how to handle herself. She knows what she wants from life. And as the book progresses, you get a feeling you know exactly where Victoria is going to go with her life. She's going to have total control. She's extraordinary. And there's another character here who I see as a rather modern character too, and that is a woman called Eleanor Witterson. Now, Eleanor Witterson is actually a courtesan, which is not unusual in 19th century London, a very high-class courtesan. But she is actually the reason that Charles comes out to the Pilbara with his 3 children in order to make money from his uncle's sheep and cattle station, in order to pay back the hefty debt incurred by his father, William, which is running a risk with the Pendleton family estate. And this is all due to Eleanor Witterson. So Charles considers Eleanor absolutely evil. The truth of the matter is that his father, William, who is a very honourable man, is deeply in love with Eleanor Witterson, and he believes entirely that she is the respectable widow that she professes to be, and he asks her to marry him. He wants to make her mistress of Pendleton. But Eleanor won't agree. She doesn't like the country. She wants to remain in London. Now, this is most unusual for a woman like Eleanor on the cusp of turning 40 to not back a bloke's, offer of marriage and security like that. Unheard of. But Eleanor, again, she's another very, very strong woman, and she knows how to get what she wants in a man's world, and so she does. Now, does that really necessarily make her evil, or does that make her just a woman who has learnt how to find her own way in a world that is definitely ruled by men? So, in a bizarre way, I see both Victoria and Eleanor as sort of, for those days, I wouldn't even know the meaning of the word, feminists. That's the little modern element that I feel is there. And it is always the characters that grab me when I'm writing a book. As it is, I must say, when I'm reading a book, yeah, I'm very after character-driven stories. And there are certainly very many colourful characters in Pilbara. So I hope, if you do read it, that you find them as colourful as I do. And thanks very much for your attention. That's enough of me just blathering on, although you're going to cop more, because we're going to segue on to Q&A now. If anybody wants to ask a question, just whack up a hand and you'll be galloped up to with a microphone. Or if you want to, just yell out loud, but whichever. Yes, the lady in the middle. Did we all get that? Do I know the ending, and do I know, look, it's very dependent. No, I don't. Except for 2 of my books, I certainly have known the ending, because they both had a reveal. I think one was Heritage and one was Maralinga. two of my books that had a big reveal at the end. And then you have to do that Agatha Christie thing of, as you write, you think, will they get it there? Oh, will they get it? Well, and you really have to be very careful about the structure without giving away the big reveal at the end. But if I don't have a reveal, in the majority of books I don't, those characters can take me places I had not expected them to, most definitely. See, now you're getting frustrated at not getting to you. Oh, no, I could hear that. Is Victoria based on any particular person? Yeah? Look, no, I don't know where Victoria came from, frankly. It's weird because some characters, oh God, I remember that bloke I wrote in Centre Stage, second book, and the agent, my lovely acting agent, then she looked at me and she said, Judy, I'm seeing you with whole new eyes. Where did Alex come from? This is this madman obsessed with death. I'm not obsessed with death, but I don't know where he came from. So I don't know. My editors were trying very much to say, look, surely, I mean, Victoria has come from as I said, landed gentry, the Pendleton estate, well-brought-up girl in England, surely it's the Pilbara that has made her this creature. And I thought, no, I don't want to have to go to great lengths to say this is the Pilbara that has made this girl, because that's not the only scene where Victoria really holds her own, believe you me. And I thought, no, I want her to be a weird girl, but a girl that has such an innate something that it won't sit in its place. Hence I say that feminist thing without her even knowing it. I can do anything a bloke can do. That's innately in her. So I don't know, maybe it's... I have a dear girlfriend of mine called Susie, and she says, isn't it funny, Jude? She said, all the noble leading women in your books are you. Again, load of absolute bull. And she said, and all the absolute bitches are me. She was right there. Eleanor is her, for starters, because I've never known a more manipulative woman in my life than Susie. Frightfully clever. I envy her terribly. So, anyway, yeah. Anybody else? Yes? Look, you're going to get a mic.
When you're reading your extracts then, with the voices of all your characters, when you're writing your book, each time the character comes up, does that voice come into your...
That's a very good question, yeah. Look, obviously it does to a certain extent. I don't read my books out loud to myself as I read to you then, but the voices are all there in my head. And it is the actor in me. I think actors make very good writers, and I do use quite a lot of dialogue in my books, because the dialogue that we use is very much evidence of who we are. And it's not, I mean, obviously the dialogue, according to the period that you're setting the book is going to be different. People spoke differently in the 1800s. People speak differently today than they did when I was a kid. But also everybody speaks differently depending upon who they're speaking to. You'll use a different voice to your kids or your employer or your employees or your husband or and that's something I say when I'm on a writer's gig where there are younger writers and they want to, and I will say, look, read your dialogue out loud. It's a very good idea. So I don't personally read mine out, but it's going around my head. Absolutely correct, yeah. There's another lady there, yes?
I'd like to thank you for writing this book because my great-grandfather worked in Cossack.
In Cossack, did he?
Yes.
Oh, what did he do in Cossack?
He...
Do you want to grab that mic so everybody can really hear you clearly? Or don't if you don't want to.
Yeah. So he came out from Liverpool in 1885.
3 years before Charles, yes.
As the 10th child, and his family were in shipping in Liverpool.
Uh-huh.
So he came out and he worked in the Adelaide Steamship Company at Cossack for 5 years.
Yeah.
From 1895. And then he worked for Holt's line of steamers at Port Hedland for 2 years.
Yeah.
And after that, he established his own shipping agency business at Port Hedland.
Radio, okay. Because within that time, anyway, in the 1890s, there was no port in Cossack.
Yes.
They built the port, the deep water port at Point Sampson. Very interesting.
And my grandfather was born in Roebourne.
In where?
Roebourne.
In Roebourne. Oh, right. Okay, well,
So
it's
I
greatly
really
changed
appreciate
now.
you writing this book because I'm going to learn a lot. I haven't finished yet, but thank you.
Okay, good on you.
so
Thank
much.
you. Anybody else? Because you must be getting a bit sick of the sound of my voice by now. Okay. Are we on time? Shall we leave it at that? Somebody else wants one up the back there. Oh, sorry. Oh, I couldn't see. I couldn't see you there. Yeah. Okay. We're on time. Time to call it a halt, or do you want to milk another question, or what? What was that? Final what? Oh, the signing. Oh, yes, sorry. I'm supposed to segue onto this. Sorry. I'm not doing my job correctly. Now, I'm going to depart this stage. Was that a sigh of relief I heard? Anyway, I'm going to depart and I'm going to go over there to that table. And Laura from Book Grove, hello Laura, is sitting up there, and if anybody wants to buy a book, I'll be over there to sign it. And in the meantime, thank you all very, very much for being such a beautiful audience. Thank you.